Welcome to Rotting Jewels. My name is Dana. For new visitors, I have almost 2 years' worth of what I refer to as active research on the topic we're going to discuss today on my YouTube channel, which will be linked in the description along with my link tree. We are going to continue a very long journey of challenging the public consumption narratives of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. You may have heard of them, or may know them under their modern-day iteration, the Best Friends Animal Society, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. In order to challenge the aforementioned public consumption narrative, as in the narrative spoon-fed to the public, we need an idea of how they came to be, what they believe, what they strike down as satanic panic conspiracy theories, and why they tried to distance themselves from the humble 37,700-acre animal sanctuary tucked away in what was once referred to as Little Hollywood in Kanab, Utah. We continue this journey by asking one question.
What is the process?
Oh, must we drag all that up again?
Is it old to the death? Better hold your breath. In this cell, I prevail. Freddy sent from hell. Ring the bell when you're finished. I'm a grown man and winning. Sacrifice it to the demons. Know I love it when you screaming. Commit to your thought. Do it now what you lost in the darkness. You will never wake up so conscious, anxious. Why are you so scared of feeling pain, bitch? Devil in your soul. Cut it now and then you'll go. Walk on the dark path. Kill and you feel that. Never in your life you gotta rush from the kickback. Matt blank black 10 knife on the neck, man. Hear the whispering, devil taking over them. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. All red on me, got the blood up in your hair. Sign your soul to the devil, now you asking is it fair? Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. All red on me, got the blood up in your hair. Sign your soul to the devil, now you asking is it fair?
Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work.
One of the 2-inch headlines in one of the tabloids was Mindbenders of Mayfair. The Mindbenders of Mayfair. Of course, we relished it. We loved it. I guess because of his insults. Because cults flourish, the more antagonism against a cult, the more it flourishes because we're right and they're wrong,
I must have been there for a few months. And then one day, Marianne called us all. We were all in the main hall sitting around.
And Marianne says, well, it's time to get out of England. England hates us, they reject us. Screw them, let's go and start a community, we'll go and find an island.
Today, we are going to examine the circumstances surrounding the well-known exodus of the Process Church of the Final Judgment to Xtul, Mexico, and the Bahamas. The process and its later iterations of the Foundation Faith and/or Church of the Millennium, and the Foundation and/or Church of God refer to Xtul as the place of miracles. I suppose that would depend on one's definition of what a miracle is, if one believes in such things. But no, dear listener, today I want to highlight a different angle to the story, one that is left out of the group's romantic retelling of its past. This imperative part of process history will, in time, hopefully help illustrate why they were able to obtain charity status in the United States first, and held on to such status in their home country for such a brief amount of time.
Finding out who we were gave us a sort of sense of confidence about ourselves. about ourselves, not about now that I'm brainwashed, you know. I feel all right because I worship so-and-so or whatever. That's not how it was.
Was the world going mad?
The establishment, people who were part of the status quo or whatever, they just didn't get it. And they thought it was weird. Anything that was different was weird. And so they got afraid.
Were the gray forces taking over? Or was the process running away with its tails between its legs to a place far away where they could isolate themselves and find Satan, or Satan find them? That is for you to decide. This is going to be a very long episode, guys. Today, we will be using Love, Sex, Fear, and Death, excerpts from the 1974 UK High Court case that Ed Sanders won against the process. Yes, I know, every documentary and interview boasts victory against Ed, but he won and made case law. We'll address this in more detail in a different episode. An article from the National Institute of Mental Health, London, spring of 1967, titled The Process. Program to Kill, The Politics of Serial Murder, by the late Dave McGowan. Charles Manson was a Scientologist, by the late Arnie Lerma. An excerpt from an interview with Victor Wilde of the Gypsy Jokers, also known as Brother Eli, from Ed Sanders' archives at Princeton University. And a Guardian's Office file from the Church of Scientology on Charles Manson. Let's start out with Timothy Wiley in Love, Sex, Fear, and Death. We weren't to spend long at Balfour Place before the enthusiasm we had attracted among young people in what was soon to become swinging London started causing waves, resulting in some critical and downright insulting magazine and newspaper articles. We were called the mind-benders of Mayfair by one of the more scurrilous rags, and some of the parents of the younger members were starting to have their concerns. One of the events which occurred while we were living in Balfour Place that went toward confirming we were on the right course concerned the younger brother of Christopher DePire, one of the original members. Jonathan could have only been 17 or 18 at the time and desperately wanted to join his brother Christopher in the process, in spite of their parents' refusal to sanction it. The parents, who I imagine weren't particularly overjoyed to have even one son in the group, promptly took out a court case against us to get him back. Ronnie R.D. Lang, the renowned Scottish psychiatrist, was one of the sympathetic witnesses we called, but it wasn't the witnesses who necessarily won the case for us. At a key point, a thick envelope arrived at Balfour Place addressed to us and written by the parents' attorneys, but intended for their eyes only. Someone must have misaddressed it. The papers laid out their entire legal strategy clearly enough for our attorney to predict their moves and easily win the case. Jonathan stayed. As a side note, Jonathan DePire is at Best Friends Animal Society today, and his brother is now deceased but was also at Best Friends. Continuing from Love, Sex, Fear, and Death. The two major lectures that had been fixed up for Robert, one in the prestigious Oxford Union and the other at the London School of Economics, were both ill-considered venues that produced hoots of ridicule. I didn't attend either talk, but I still recall how the atmosphere changed when those who had gone to support Robert returned. A feeling of terrible disappointment lay thick in the air, masked on the surface by bravado and our increasing cynicism about the human race. Although it was Marianne who first must have brought it up, we all knew the writing was on the wall. But, of course, we reassured ourselves with the understanding that prophets were never welcome in their own country.
Of course, no prophet is welcome in his own country, and England is particularly allergic to prophets of all kinds, you know.
I don't believe it was so much our sense of a looming apocalypse that troubled us at this stage as our frustration with the dulled British public and their apathetic response to what to us was glaringly obvious. There was something fundamentally wrong with Western civilization. It was time to move.
Hello.
You boys like Mexico? Yeah!
It was mid-1966, and there were about 35 of us by this stage, most living communally in the Balfour Place mansion. I'd finished all the architectural work, and since the decision to become a community occurred after the interior was completed, we used the smaller carpeted rooms on the upper floors as dormitories. The men and women were separated and placed about 6 to each room. They were Spartan conditions. No beds, just sleeping bags on the floor, half a dozen bodies tossing and turning, wheezing and snoring, everybody exhausted from the psychic intimacy of all living together. Quite how it was decided that we would all go and find an island and start anew over there, I don't think anyone knew for certain. And why the Bahamas? I suspect it might have well been that the Caribbean was the only place we thought that there might be islands for sale. I'm sure Marianne had America in her sights, even back then. But at that point, the group was fairly democratic, and she was still letting it be seen that Robert was making the final decisions. Since this is, of necessity, a personal account, I need to explain an aspect of my ongoing relationship with Robert. Although we'd been the best of friends for the 3 years he attended architectural school, and I appreciated his intelligence and the breadth of his interest, design had never come easy to him. We'd worked together on a number of student projects, and I was all too aware of his flaws. He was one of those people shackled by their intelligence, living so much in their heads with so many alternatives and options, that they find it almost impossible to make a decision. Although I wouldn't have been able to understand it in these terms at the time, Robert was shockingly emotionally immature. All of us public school boys tended to be emotionally underdeveloped to some extent, but we weren't being set up by Marianne to be the leader.
Marianne, you see, had a sense of herself as a goddess. Now, if you're a goddess and you got a husband, well, what you going to do about that? You're going to messianize him.
In short, I was never really able to take Robert seriously. I'd known him so well that I was frequently embarrassed for him in public situations. The way Marianne would subtly control him, allowing him to take center stage, stroking his hair back into place, and shrewdly feeding him lines. Although I respected the clarity and intelligence of the logics, the papers Marianne and Robert prepared as the basis of their teachings, and which we all later had to learn by heart, Robert's books and his articles for Process magazine I found virtually unreadable. However, none of this mattered to me. I'd become fixated on Marianne by this time. Although I was fascinated by her, I still didn't like her any better. I knew I'd joined the process for an important spiritual experience, and I was determined to see it through. In retrospect, I'm perfectly certain the main instigation for leaving London came from Marianne, and I can only admire the way she manipulated the group into thinking the idea sprang from us, collectively.
Zoltan! Zoltan! Zoltan!
We thought we were leaving England forever, a prospect both exciting and shocking. Did Marianne know something the other cult members weren't privy to? Likely so. In the 1974 court case with Ed, the real reason the process was so anxious to leave London was a very different story. Quoting from the record, "Consider the evidence of that young woman, Miss Ventris. She may have struck you as a rather good example of an unsophisticated person. I don't know. I think it is perhaps worth reminding you of how she described the impact on herself of her association with the Process Church, which she came into contact with, she told us, in 1965 or 66 because she heard someone talking about it at a party. She attended the premises in Wigmore Street, and there, she says, I first saw Robert de Grimston. He gave me an interview. I can't remember what happened. I had to sign some document about responsibility of joining. If I joined and got ill, it was my responsibility. I think it specified mental illness. That piece of evidence was not challenged in any way. And if it be true that it was thought necessary to make a potential convert sign a document that she was joining on her own responsibility, and if she got ill, no one else would have to carry any responsibility, and that it specified mental illness, it is for you to consider whether or not it does throw some light on the technique of the Process Church as applied to its converts. During the examination of this witness, Tessa Ventris, they ask, "You said that the group moved from England to get away from bad publicity?" She answers yes. What sort of publicity was it that was causing trouble? There were several unpleasant articles in the papers and a threat that the BMA, the British Medical Association, might get unpleasant with us. Do you know on what grounds the British Medical Association were planning to cause difficulties? What were they getting so upset about? That we were run by people unqualified to treat people who might be mentally ill. I'm sorry if this sounds obvious. Unqualified to do what? To be like a psychiatrist. Now we are going to read the article in its entirety from the National Institute of Mental Health, London, titled The Process, Spring of 1967. Buckle in, because we're going to be talking about Programmed to Kill, Charles Manson, Victor Wilde, and Scientology. The process was devised as a therapy to free people from their compulsions and to release their latent capacities and potentialities. Its creators were a young architectural student and a young Scotswoman with a powerful personality who had met on a course run by the pseudo-psychological cult Scientology.
Mr. Hubbard, I'd like now to take somebody who would like to get into Scientology. How do they go about this?
Well, normally they read books, and they read quite a few books, and they are around and about it for, well, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Well, they're really in Scientology. They will belong to a group and so on. They will get auditing. Their IQ goes up. Their abilities increase. They're more capable in handling their lives. And then somebody decides that he wants to be an auditor. All right, he can go to school and study this and find out how to be one and so help others.
They developed their own theories and began to interest their friends in the new therapy they had devised. The group grew, and the process was soon charging Hurley Street fees for their courses. The strange sequel is described by Julian Smithles. Robert de Grimston and Marianne McLean incorporated some of the ideas of Scientology in the process, the treatment they had devised after attending one of the courses run by this worldwide pseudo-psychological cult, but the similarities were only superficial, and the process developed along its own distinctive lines. The two movements had in common the use of the Hubbard E-meter, a crude form of lie detector, which was claimed to measure the intensity of thoughts passing through the mind.
We did have what we called a P-scope, which was essentially a lie detector, measuring emotional content. And those were very fascinating. They really were very fascinating. It went through a whole series of, answers which would be marked by the meter and written down. And then you go through them again and again and again and again. And the meter wouldn't do this anymore. It might just do this on some of them. So those really crossed off. And eventually you'd land on one that was the most important one, because that still was carrying emotional charge.
The meter had been adopted by Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, an engineer and science fiction writer and the founder of Scientology in 1950. Together, de Grimston and Miss McLean developed their theories and, in the summer of 1963, began to interest their friends in their ideas.
Robert and Marianne realized that this E-meter, the thing that the Scientologists use, one could use it in order to go far, far deeper into the self.
These friends, in turn, brought in their friends, and the process was launched. After their marriage in 1964, the de Grimstons set up house in a flat in Wigmore Street and began to run a communication course there based on their ideas. This course was designed to help people, through disciplinary exercises, to communicate more directly and more effectively.
The idea is basically to flatten out the reactivity. And there are not many ways in life that you can actually push yourself to the limit in order to learn to master what comes out when you push to the limit.
Sessions were held on several evenings a week from 7 to 10 p.m., and the full course of 45 evenings cost £30. Sometime earlier, the de Grimstons had developed a more intensive individual therapy consisting of question and answer interviews between a therapist and subject. The fee was originally £3 an hour, but later, both larger and smaller sums were accepted according to the means of the patient. The various courses attracted a growing number of followers, mostly young, upper-middle-class people from professional families, and in March 1966, a move was made to larger premises at Balfour Place, Mayfair.
In London, they had this house which housed a cinema and a restaurant, and there'd be nightly meetings. And this was in Mayfair. This was in the most expensive part of London.
They were in Balfour Place, near the Connors Hotel, very elegant address. Upstairs were the kind of priesthood, so you could hear shouts and lamentations.
It is estimated that between 200 and 300 people attended process courses for long or short periods. The process no longer exists as a psychological exercise. Its short life as a therapy, about 3 years, came to an end during last summer when the group went to the Bahamas and then on to Mexico. Most of the party returned a few months later in the wake of 3 minors, members of the group, who had come back from Mexico as a result of action by their anxious parents. The others, between 10 and 20 of them, remain at Balfour Place, Mayfair. To an outsider, the process looks like a party game that went wrong, a game for rich young people. But its impact upon those involved was considerable, and many who decided to take the preliminary communications course clearly believed that they would be helped with their personal difficulties. It is possible that this communal course may have been helpful in giving some participants greater social competence, but for many, these communal courses were only the mild first stage in a series of intensely disturbing emotional experiences.
I think it's brainwashing.
The strength of the process lay in the vulnerability of its adherents, almost all young and many at crisis points in their lives. They needed help, and the process, they believed, would provide it. Their first impressions were favorable, and the communal courses were even enjoyable. Most of them appear to have liked the 2 de Grimstons well enough, and to have enjoyed these social evenings with people of their own age and class. The idea that the process could help them remained their strongest link with it, and many were convinced enough to pay substantial sums to the organization for the communal and individual courses. Under the individual treatment, the client submitted to high-pressure probing and questioning, often for long periods, by a therapist who would either be one of the de Grimstons or someone trained by them in process techniques. Client and therapist would sit opposite one another at a table, the therapist asking a series of questions based on a well-devised plan, the patient answering.
Many did feel that way, that they are brainwashers and they're good at it.
In many cases, these long, costly, and exhausting sessions had the effect of tying patients more closely with the process. Their interest began to focus more and more upon their treatment and the de Grimstons, less and less upon the outside world, their friends outside, their parents. The process seems to have relied greatly upon the power to win the love and loyalty of people by an appeal to their highest ideals. Many of those who joined believed that the process would make them better people or help them to deal more effectively with problems. It seems clear that the powerful hold that the de Grimstons and their group had upon their patients was manifold, a combination of love and fear, but ultimately what held many of them was the promise of a desirable state which, they believed, only the process could bring about. It had almost become a religion. The young people's deep involvement in the group and the changes that this brought about in their behavior caused widespread uneasiness among parents, relations, and friends. Several parents strongly opposed their children continuing with the process, and the parents of one young man applied to have him made a ward of the court. It is evident from personal accounts that many feel that they have been through exciting but painful and, in some cases, frightening experiences. They want to forget about it. Many believe that the public should be protected against such experiences. Some believe there should be an act that prohibits any kind of treatment by people without some recognized qualification for this kind of work. A consultant psychiatrist who was treating a schizophrenic who had attended a Scientology course was doubtful whether such semi-psychological cults as Scientology or the process had been proved to be harmful. They appealed to artistic people, students from Oxford or Cambridge, but you would never find a science student from Imperial College joining. He said that the attitude of many who joined would be that any hypothesis that had not been disproven was worth a try. Another psychiatrist paralleled the various stages through which the process passed with the natural history of the schizoid progression. There was the growing self-centeredness of the group, the omnipotence of its thinking, a characteristic schizoid feature, poverty of ideation, and more nebulous concepts. Latterly, there was the quasi-religious element and the decisions to abandon the world completely and become an isolated community in the wilds of Mexico. Like many processees, the writer of this article was drawn into the organization by a personal friend who had undergone the treatment. Suspicious at first, she was given a warm welcome and felt disposed to think the course genuinely helpful. In this article, she describes the subsequent events that led her into greater and greater involvement, and then to her ultimate break with the group. Looking back on 5 months now, which seems like a childhood nightmare, I am at a complete loss to work out how I got involved in the process in the first place, and how it made me so strangely unaware of the goings-on of the world outside. The gradual encroachment of the organization on my individuality, and how I lost all ability to make any detached and reasoned judgment when generally considered to be a reasonably normal, balanced, and intelligent person, remains a mystery. Trying to think back and piece the whole story together, it has seemed to me that the only satisfactory way in which I can get across any of the atmosphere of that strange flat in Wigmore Street, the predecessor of the luxurious Park Lane setup, is to run through events in a roughly chronological order. It is bound to be an unsatisfactory account. I have forgotten a lot, aided by an extraordinary, if rather overdeveloped gift for blocking unpleasant things out of my mind, which was, I am sure, the thing that enabled me to recover from the whole experience with remarkable speed. Regarding the author's description of their ability to disassociate, I'd like to read a couple excerpts from Program to Kill, The Politics of Serial Murder by the late David McGowan. I am not in any way insinuating the author as MPD or DID, but I do think it's interesting to consider her acknowledgement that such ability allowed her to break free from the process. From PTK. The degree to which any given person is susceptible to being mind-controlled is a direct function of that person's susceptibility to what are known as dissociative states. According to the psychiatric community, dissociative states or dissociative disorders include amnesia, fugue state, and what used to be called multiple personality disorder, MPD, but is now generally referred to as dissociative identity disorder, DID. All of these terms describe the same basic phenomenon. A person who is seemingly in control of his or her actions over a given time period is unable, at a later date, to recall or account for those actions. While the ability to dissociate is likely universal, or nearly so, some people are clearly more susceptible to dissociative states than are others. There's little question that someone's innate ability to disassociate can be greatly enhanced, although not necessarily by ethical means. The most severe of the dissociative disorders, MPD or DID, is in almost all cases created by psychological trauma so severe that the traumatic episodes cannot be integrated into the experiences of the core personality. By far, the most common cause of MPD is early childhood trauma, usually, but not always, resulting from horrific abuse by a parent or other adult guardian. As mental health professionals have long recognized, the normal human reaction to highly stressful situations is what is known as the fight or flight response. Children, however, typically lack the ability to either fight off or flee from their attackers and abusers. This is particularly true, of course, for very young children. The human brain, that wonderfully resilient organ, therefore reacts in the best way that it can under the circumstances. It allows the child to mentally flee from the situation. When the abuse is of an extreme and sustained nature, the brain's response is to build a virtual wall around the traumatic experiences by creating a separate and distinct alter personality to deal with the current and future episodes of abuse. Again, dear listeners, simply highlighting that the author acknowledges their ability to dissociate almost on command. That is my reading, but I will leave that interpretation up to you. And the author acknowledging the advantages of a dissociative state are interesting to consider in light of Charles Manson's connections to the process. Continuing the article. And, of course, to quote the organization's own dictum, the process is constantly changing. The process that I knew was very different from the process that set off in search of paradise in Nassau, and also different from the process which is now in Mayfair once more as I write. My first encounter with the organization was in October 1965. It then called itself Compulsions Analysis, constantly being misspelt by journalistic critics as compulsive analysis, a Freudian slip in which its authors must subsequently have taken great pride, as it proved to be an accurate prophecy. A boyfriend, to whom I shortly afterwards became engaged, had decided to become one of their therapists after receiving treatment, which, there is no denying, had, in the short term at least, done him an enormous amount of good. My first reaction when I heard of it had been one of healthy suspicion. All right for you, chum, but not my line at all. When persuaded to go to one of the evening communications courses in the interest of our continuing good relationship, I was filled with stark terror. My fears seemed hardly justified, for I received a very warm welcome, which might perhaps have been somewhat stylized, but there was no doubt of its good faith. The evening was spent in a form of group therapy which appeared to be quite constructive. I was hailed by Marianne de Grimston and members of the group as a wonderfully warm and relaxed person. I suppose I might be described as fairly amicable with most of my fellow men, but no one who has ever talked to me for more than 5 minutes could ever describe me as relaxed. However, this flood of compliments made me feel kindly disposed towards the whole outfit, and I was most impressed with the way in which the people, 14 or 15 in number, in that room were tackling with their own and each other's problems with a genuine wish to help. I was also struck by their practical application of a principle which amounted to considering one's own shortcomings before blaming or disliking other people. I attended a number of these evenings, producing, as everyone knew did from time to time, what I regarded as constructive criticisms of the way things were run and some of the ideas. With the benefit of hindsight, I can see that the way in which these were dealt with should have flashed the red light. Marianne or Bob de Grimston usually answered with a, "That's your reality," or something to the effect that these were only things that could be fully understood by the initiated, those who had undergone the individual therapy. As time wore on towards Christmas, the answer was that each one of us recognized deep inside himself that the process was the only ultimate good. But because man was full of evil and the guilt of hundreds of generations since his original rejection of God in the Garden of Eden, he would automatically try to reject this good. Thus, one's internal serpent was fighting to get one away from the road of truth. There are few answers to this theory drummed into your head by 12 people at once, all with one idea only in their heads, that of helping you.
Want some whiskey in your water, sugar in your tea? What's all this crazy question they're asking me? This is the craziest party that could ever be. Don't turn on the lights, cause I don't wanna see. Mama told me not to come. Mama told me not to come. That ain't the way to have fun, no. Open up the window, let some air into this room. I think I'm almost choking from the smell of stale perfume. And that cigarette you're smoking, I'll scare me half to death. Open up the window, sucker, let me catch my breath. Mama told me not to come. Mama told me not to come. That ain't the way to have fun, son. That ain't the way to have fun. She said, oh yeah. Radio is blasting, someone's knocking at the door. I'm looking at my girlfriend, she passed out on the floor. I've seen so many things I ain't never seen before. Don't know what it is, I don't wanna see no more. Mama told me not to come. Mama told me not to come. She said, that ain't the way to have fun, son. That ain't the way to have fun, no. Mama told me, mama told me, mama told me, mama told me, mama told me.
Before my final departure, I had some fairly splendid battles, but one was inevitably on the losing side. Anyway, by the end of November, I became fully initiated into the mystic rite of sessions. I had been putting it off for as long as possible, afflicted once more with the stark terror that I put down to my own errant cowardice. But the course of true love once more won the day, and I took a week off work to do a crash course. 6 hours a day of sitting, half lying, in a rather comfortable garden chair, the sort that adorns the most chic of patios. Looking back on it, I imagine I was probably too tired to be taking very much active part anyway. If I wasn't at the beginning, 2 or 3 days of that sort of treatment certainly made me so. We're going to diverge from the article for a moment and discuss Charles Manson. From Ed Sanders' Files, this is an interview with Victor Wilde in Goleta, California, March 8th, 1971. The detective conducting the interview says, shortly after Manson was arrested, he said that he had gone through a 2-week crash course in Los Angeles with the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Victor Wilde said, what we had was called a crash course in Los Angeles, but the only people that were allowed in were internal members of the church. It takes up to 4 months of really hard work to become an internal member, so it wasn't possible for him to have been in the crash course at that time. And certainly none of the internal members were like that guy, and I knew every one of them very well. The detective asks if the crash courses weren't necessary for initiates or acolytes or new members of the process. Victor Wilde ends up having to walk his statement back and says yes, there was a level of crash course available to initiates, but the intense crash course was only available to messengers or above. It's interesting to consider if the author of this article received the same crash course that Charles Manson states he received from the Process Church of the Final Judgment. I'd also like to reference a Guardian's Office document from the Church of Scientology retrieved during Operation Snow White, Manson, and Bruce Davis, discussing Charles Manson's time in prison with Lanier Raymer, who taught Charles Manson Scientology. Charles Manson received 150 hours of auditing. This, according to Manson, drove him insane, and he was desperate to get away from his auditor. He eventually managed to get put into solitary confinement. In another memo from the Guardian's office titled Possibilities, Lanier Raymer. 2 or 3 years later, he ends up with Manson in Washington State, and Manson originates that he wants Raymer, who was now his cellmate, to teach him about Scientology. After about a month, Manson may have been fed LSD, per a report we have, and then freaked out and wanted to get away from his auditor. I'm not sure on the exact sequence of events. We'll discuss the Church of Scientology's continued vested interest to this day in the Charles Manson case, but I just think that the parallels here are very fascinating. Let's continue the article. However, repetitively dragging out my fears, hopes, beliefs, and realities in answer to monotonous questioning seemed not altogether unpleasant. I wrote everything I found down in a blue exercise book, as was the custom, and as soon as I emerged, the whole lot became the public property of the group downstairs. I roared through my case at record speed in the midst of general acclaim. However, it was during this week that an unexpected event occurred that achieved my final involvement. I emerged from my 6 hours one afternoon to find the place full of press reporters who were, in their turn, full of criticism. I talked to them, fearing that failure to do so would brand me as an infidel, and I became the leading feature of their full-page article the next week. I was at last committed. There was general rejoicing all around among the faithful, and, having stuck my neck out this far, to the horror of all my friends and relations, I had to stick to my guns. The guns, in this case, were television, and we all made a film which the BBC showed, together with some fairly cynical editorial comment. I began to lose myself totally and have absolutely no awareness of the people I knew and liked in the world outside. Interest in any other event, in anything not involving the immediate group, faded. I joined energetically in the campaign mounted to save the world in the middle of winter.
Their magazine exhorts readers to invest in the end of the world. Got a fortune you don't know what to do with? Said one issue. Give everything you have to the process and you'll never regret it. Not in the next world, or what is left of this one.
Typed documents propounding process doctrine, which I never saw completed, helped to organize meetings in Oxford, and stood by at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park while the innermost ring of apostles harangued the rather chilly masses. We are man's only way back to God, but man rejects us. The reasons given for the enormous hostility to the organization shown by those who had either never experienced it or had left it was their guilt at once more rejecting God. By January 1966, I was classed as thoroughly wicked by the powers that be. I was informed that I was making subtle attempts to draw others away from the process. I was also sticking to my promise made 6 months earlier of going to the country to look after things while my parents were abroad for 2 months, and to leave Wigmore Street for more than 24 hours was the unforgivable betrayal. Madly, I had more and more sessions to try and get over these problems, particularly because of this terrible wickedness which had been mine for so many generations. The process then believed in reincarnation. I don't know whether it does now. And because everything was still subtly coated in the warmth and generosity with which my original appearance on the scene had been greeted. These sessions failed to achieve anything. I went off to the country and found, to my shame, that I still rather enjoyed civilized conversation and the warm, friendly, secure atmosphere of my own home and family. I came up to London from time to time for a day or two and a session or two, tremendous arguments ensuing every time because I found out that I could not make myself believe that the end of the world was at hand, which was, by then, a must. Even if I had succeeded in doing so by the dint of the hundreds of sessions that were the recommended cure, I was not at all sure that the right way to prepare oneself for it was to live in total isolation, examining one's soul in Mayfair. On the whole, I was in favor of something a little more effective in helping others, even if they were damned, which I had felt originally that the process would do. I was lucky. The fact that I had a perfectly made opportunity to detach myself enabled me to start using my senses again. The fact that I had escaped selling my soul, and that I therefore felt in some strange way indestructible, boosted me through the rather hard first few weeks after I left. And I had marvelous friends, 1 or 2 who had been through the experience themselves, and others who had remained completely loyal to me throughout, however much I had rebuffed and ignored them. I found I recovered and started to lead a normal life again very quickly, regarding the whole thing as a disastrous, but perhaps a salutary experience. I found that I had to start again in learning to accept myself and my surroundings, for while the process set out to achieve these things for those who joined it, its effect for me was just the opposite. This is not obviously a comprehensive account at all, nor could it be. I have omitted all the actual details of what I found in my sessions. These are of personal interest only and hard to explain to anyone not familiar with the internal operations of the organization. I hope that this episode has helped to dispel some of the, what one could call, conspiracy theories around the reasoning behind the process's exodus to the Bahamas and Xtul. It would seem that the fear of bad press about things that they were actively doing is the real reason why they left London. I would like to close out with Arnie Lerma. Charles Manson was a Scientologist. He opens with a quote from L. Ron Hubbard. A very effective thought control technique could also be worked out from Scientology, which could be used to make individuals into willing slaves. Arnie Lerma. Charles Manson, having grown up in reform schools and penitentiaries, was trained by professional criminal minds. I bet his insight made it instantly apparent to Charles Manson that Scientology was a useful tool to control minds. He valued it so much he even acquired a Scientology e-meter so he could practice Scientology. What cannot be debated is that there was something in Scientology that a serial killer criminal mind found very appealing. He includes a quote from David Berkowitz. There are other Sams out there. God help the world.